Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Recently, one of our viewers, Declan the Awesome, came up with a great question. He basically asked us which era of the Jedi Order is superior. A lot of you guys know that the Jedi Order, despite being this monolithic organization, was actually constantly evolving and reinventing itself throughout its history. In Legends, the organization is tens of thousands of years old and stretches all the way back to the earliest days of the Old Republic. And yes, guys, we're gonna have to dip into the Legends a bit here, and that's because although a lot of these eras in Jedi history are now canonized, the Disney canon doesn't really have a lot of detail about these periods of history, and there are actually some really interesting ideas being thrown around by these earlier versions of the Jedi Order, and I definitely want to discuss that in this video. But before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, Star Trek Fleet Command. The Borg are back, and they're trying to assimilate everyone. It's up to you as a Federation commander to build a powerful fleet and take on anyone who challenges peace in the galaxy. Build up your starbase and begin to expand your territory and eliminate hostile forces by designing your own unique fleet made up of many famous starship designs from the Star Trek universe. Star Trek Fleet Command is a living and breathing game which is constantly being updated with new features, including the recently added Fleet Commander's position. Fleet Commanders can be assigned to oversee the strategy of your starbase and give you powerful buffs and increased efficiency. Choose from iconic leaders like Admiral James T. Kirk, Captain Spock, or even Locutus of Borg, aka Picard, after he's been assimilated by the Borg. If this sounds like a game that you guys might be interested in playing, check out the description down below or scan the QR code on screen for more information. Thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. In Legends, the Jedi Order finds its roots in the ancient Jedi organization, which in my opinion is probably the best rendition of the Jedi Order, although there are, I guess, some counter-arguments you can make here. Now, this organization didn't start by chance. There seemed to be some type of invisible celestial hand moving things into position to create the perfect kind of moment and opportunity for this to happen. Around 36,000 years ago, 8 mysterious pyramid ships known as Thor-Yor landed on planets across the galaxy known for having large populations of Force sensitives. Worlds like Dathomir, Ryloth, and back then, even Kashyyyk. These ships would collect all of the Force sensitives from these planets and then journey to the Force-rich planet of Tython in the deep core. Tython was in a star system that was surrounded by gravitational anomalies. So once these Force users were deposited in this system, they were basically stuck there, which is really important to the development of this order. They were basically isolated from the wider galaxy. The settlers from Thor-Yor would quickly embrace the idea that they were sent to this planet to learn about the Force and would set up an organization that would be known as the Jedi Order. Tython was a vibrant and also chaotic planet, and it was so intimately connected with the Force that whenever the planet felt like the Force was not in balance because of the users on the planet, chaotic storms would just cross the entire planet, destroying everything. This phenomenon forced the Jedi to focus a lot on finding balance in the Force, and this doesn't mean just by, eliminating dark side Force users. That's kind of the mentality of what balancing the Force would eventually become. At least during this ancient period, finding balance within the Force was about finding balance within oneself. There was this recognition that every individual had light side and dark side tendencies, and the idea was to control both of them. Above the planet of Tython, there were also 2 moons, Ashla and Bogon, and they represented the light and dark side of the Force. They basically hung up there and were a great visual reminder of what was important for the Jedi. Also, when one of these Force users went too much to the dark side, the Jedi would basically exile them to Ashla, the light side moon, and then vice versa. If a Jedi became too focused on the light side, they would be sent to Bogan, the dark side moon. It was all about balance. The Jedi would operate peacefully for almost 10,000 years until finally the Rakatan Infinite Empire invaded the system, causing widespread destruction across Tython. Although the Rakatans were eventually defeated and driven off the planet, the damage had been done, and the Jedi would change forever. and for worse. In the ensuing decades, the balance of the Jedi Order collapsed, and this would lead way to force wars between dark and light side extremists who used to belong to the Jedi Order. Even though the Jedi Order eventually collapsed, it did survive for more than 10,000 years, making it one of the longest reigning periods in Jedi Order that was stable and didn't have any major collapse. I also really like their philosophy of internal balance. I think this is something that more modern versions of the Jedi Order could learn from. But because they were in isolation, I think it's not really fair to call them the best version of the Jedi Order, because I think you need to have a bit of adversity to become, the GOAT. Despite my own ideological preference for balance, we have to accept perhaps the natural order of Force users in the galaxy is for dark and light side factions to emerge and fight against each other, as was common during the Old Republic era. The period starts with the Great Sith War, a conflict started by the Sith Empire that was further expanded when a pair of Jedi known as Ulic Qel-Droma and Exar Kun fell to the dark side and basically switched sides. The Sith invasion would be broken at Coruscant, though, a notoriously difficult planet for the Sith to occupy because of its massive population, and the war would end shortly after. But just 20 years later, the hidden Sith Empire would basically start another war with one of their proxies, the Mandalorians. Mandalorians would start a devastating series of attacks on their neighboring planets. This would turn into a larger crusade, which began threatening the border regions of Republic space. But mostly, these operations were still confined in the sparsely populated Outer Rim. You see, the Republic had this really messed up and pragmatic practice of using the Outer Rim and the border regions as kind of a buffer state for any kind of invasion. The Republic was always really slow to react to any kind of conflict. It took a while to build up the political and economic means to fight a war. Now, during this time period, the Jedi weren't just headquartered on Coruscant. They also had outposts scattered across the galaxy, including on the planet of Taurus, where the local Jedi were stationed in a tower. The Jedi of the Taurus Tower formed a secret organization known as the Jedi Covenant, and they all had visions that one day one of their Padawans would basically unleash a terrible conflict that would destroy not only their lives, but also the Jedi Order and the Republic. This vision would lead to the infamous Padawan Massacre, during which the Jedi Covenant slaughtered all of their own apprentices. The fallout from this event led to the closure of the Jedi Tower on Taurus, which also had the effect of basically opening up this entire planet to Mandalorian invasion. Up until this point, the Mandalorians were pretty scared of the Jedi, and that was the only reason why they didn't invade. This was seen as a step too far for the Republic. Taurus was actually a very populated and important world, and so the Republic would declare war formally on the Mandalorians. But the conflict would not go well for the Old Republic. Their navy would be defeated in a series of very spectacular battles shortly after. A faction of the Jedi Order led by the charismatic Jedi Knight Revan wanted the Jedi to get involved in the war. When the High Council refused, which was actually quite common back then, the Jedi let the Republic fight their own battles unless the Sith were involved. And so basically Revan would have to break away with his young followers, and these Jedi ended up helping turn the tide against the Mandalorians. But unfortunately, Revan and all of his followers would also be driven mad into the dark side by how horrific the conflict was. Revan would defeat the Mandalorians at great cost at the Battle of Malachor V, ending the Mandalorian War once and for all. Revan would then journey into the unknown region seeking the hidden Sith Empire who launched this invasion in the first place, but instead of defeating the Sith Emperor, well, Revan sort of joins him and agrees to be his servant. And so just a year after disappearing into the unknown region, Revan would return to Republic space at the head of a massive invasion force and kick off the Jedi Civil War. And honestly, we're not even halfway through this period of, just constant battle, backstabbing, and terror. The Jedi Order would suffer several catastrophic defeats and almost be wiped out as an organization during this period of time. And a few centuries later, the Jedi and the Republic's power had eroded so much that the Sith were able to sack Coruscant, destroy the Jedi Temple, and force the Republic to sign the Treaty of Coruscant, which was incredibly unfavorable for both the Jedi and the Republic, and would result in a Cold War between the Sith Empire and the Republic. Although the Jedi failed spectacularly during this period of time, they were also under constant onslaught by various factions of the Sith, which means that this is probably one of the most formidable versions of the Jedi Order. For hundreds of years, the galaxy would continue to slide backwards because of the constant fighting between the Sith and the Jedi, until finally we have the new Sith Wars, which takes place around 2000 BBY to 1000 BBY. It is widely hailed as the Dark Ages of the Republic because of just how fragmented the galaxy would become. In the last few decades of this 1,000-year-long war, the Jedi Order would establish the Army of Light, a military force made up of Force sensitives and Republic soldiers. They would go on a crusade to destroy their enemies, the Brotherhood of Darkness. This was the Jedi Order in its most militarized form. The Jedi were given titles like Lords, and they were basically military commanders first and foremost, and not peacekeepers. The Jedi would severely loosen their recruitment requirements during this period of time and accepted any individual that walked through the door that had even the slightest Force sensitivity, because both the Jedi and the Sith were so desperate for manpower and were also suffering heavy casualties during this period of time. The Army of Lights would end up defeating the Brotherhood of Darkness during the Ruusan campaign at great cost, but the Sith would be completely wiped out after this last military campaign, and that would actually lead to the Ruusan Reformation, which would lead to the demilitarization of the Republic and the Jedi. This would usher in a period of peace that would last 1,000 years until the Clone Wars would start. The Sith would go into hiding and start the Rule of Two era. Now, despite the Jedi being extremely militarized during this period of time, it was also at its weakest state, in my opinion, and that was because they couldn't really focus on training the next generation. All they could focus on was fighting this war. The High Republic era of the Jedi Order happened roughly around 200 years before the Battle of Yavin. It's widely seen as the golden age of the Republic thanks to the hundreds of years of peace that preceded this time period. During the High Republic period, the Jedi were extremely ambitious. They tackled one of the Republic's oldest problems, and that was the lack of security and stability in the Outer Rim territories. Simply put, there were too many pirates and bandit gangs to attract capital investment to these regions, and at the same time, there wasn't enough money in these regions to be able to afford a security force, and so there was basically no solution here. And so for most of galactic history, this part of the Republic was neglected, had zero economic growth, and was a haven for criminals. The Jedi solution to this problem was building a massive station known as Starlight Beacon, which would serve as a hyperspace signal for lost travelers, but also be the place from which Jedi quick reaction forces could be deployed from. The Jedi numbers had swelled to huge numbers during this period of time because of the continuous centuries of peace, but they were also completely unprepared for the many great threats that waited for them in the Outer Rim. This included a bandit organization known as the Nile. These bandits had access to several different special technologies and weapons, including a terrifying species of Force-sensitive beast known as the Nameless. These beasts were able to neutralize the Jedi's connection with the Force and single-handedly help the Nile push the Jedi back from the Outer Rim. For all of you Legends fans out there, the Nameless were basically like a mix of the Vornskir and the Yaslamari that were pretty popular in the Thrawn trilogy. The Starlight Beacon would eventually be destroyed by the Nile and mark the end of the High Republic Jedi era, signaling a general retreat by the Republic from the Outer Rim, which of course would set the stage for the Free Trade Zone and the Clone Wars. The Jedi would grow increasingly dogmatic and closed-minded during this period of time and would seal their fate by joining the Republic's war effort against the Confederacy of Independent Systems. The failure of the High Republic Jedi Order and the Jedi Order that would basically fight in the Clone Wars is a sign that perhaps 800 years of continuous peace is not actually a good thing. That perhaps speaks to the fundamental flaw of the Jedi Order. They cannot exist in a vacuum because they are, at their core, an extreme organization. They're at the extreme end of the Force spectrum. The Jedi needed the Sith as much as the Sith needed them, which is odd to say because their primary interaction when encountering each other was violence and destruction. But when the Sith were left alone and didn't have the Jedi to fight, they basically fought each other until they destroyed each other. And the Jedi without the Sith, well, they became lazy, stagnant, and unrealistic about what their role in the society should be. We're not going to talk about Luke's new Jedi Order because it never really grew into something substantial. Although it should be mentioned there was a Legends version of the new Jedi Order that actually did turn into something more substantial, but it's definitely not going to get retconned into canon unless, I don't know, Marvel invades Star Wars and we have parallel universes or something like that. So which version of the Jedi Order is the best? Well, my personal and very biased answer would be the Jedi. I believe that Force users like the Jedi operated best when separated from society and allowed to focus on the internal cultivation of their connection to the Force. I think the Jedi ideologically made the most sense and was the most peaceful and sustainable version of these Force users. Yet with great power does come great responsibility, and for the Jedi to just simply ignore the plight of lesser and weaker beings, well, that would be immoral. And part of what makes the Jedi so great in the first place is their compassion and desire to help less fortunate beings. The old Republic era of the Jedi Order, while greatly flawed, did manage to fight off the Sith more than 5 different times, and they also managed to survive. Barely. But if you take a look at it, things like the sacking of Coruscant made the Jedi leaner and a much more practical organization. One could argue that this period of history featured some of the Jedi Order's best moments and also some of their worst. Let me know in the comment section below what you think here. Which version of the Jedi Order do you like the best? Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. My name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.